On a cool evening in October 2005, the small town of Redwood Shores, California, looked peaceful. The streets were quiet, and the air smelled of pine trees drifting down from the nearby hills. That night, 19-year-old Emily Carter finished her shift at a local bookstore where she worked part-time. She was a college freshman who loved reading and dreamed of becoming a teacher one day. Emily wore her favorite green sweater and carried a brown leather bag filled with books. She waved goodbye to her co-worker and walked toward her car parked just across the street. It was supposed to be a normal night. She often drove home after work, stopped for tea, and called her mom to say goodnight. But on that night, Emily never made it home. The next morning, her parents grew worried when her room was empty, her bed untouched, and her phone went straight to voicemail. By noon, her college professors noticed her empty seat in class. Calls went unanswered, and her friends couldn't reach her. The truth was simple and terrifying. Emily Carter had vanished, and no one knew why. When Emily didn't return home, her parents, Susan and Robert Carter, felt something was wrong. Emily wasn't the kind of girl to disappear without telling anyone. She was responsible, kind, and always close to her family. By late evening, Susan called the Redwood Shores Police Department. Her voice shook as she said, "My daughter didn't come home last night. Please help us." Officers quickly took down the report. Within hours, patrol cars began searching the streets Emily usually drove. The police soon found her silver Honda Civic parked near the bookstore. The car doors were locked. Inside sat her leather bag, books, and a half-empty bottle of water. Everything seemed normal, except Emily wasn't there. Detectives noticed something odd near the car. On the sidewalk, they found a single shoe, one that matched the pair Emily was wearing earlier that evening. Nearby, faint marks in the dirt looked like a struggle had taken place. Fear spread quickly through Redwood Shores. Emily wasn't just another name. She was a neighbor, a student, and a familiar smile at the bookstore. Everyone was asking the same question. Where was Emily Carter? The news spread like wildfire. By the next morning, TV stations across California carried the headline, "College Student Missing in Redwood Shores." Reporters gathered outside the bookstore, filming the quiet street now blocked with yellow police tape. Neighbors couldn't believe it. Redwood Shores was the kind of town where people left their doors unlocked, kids rode bikes at sunset, and nothing bad ever seemed to happen. For something like this to occur in their own backyard left the community shaken. Emily's parents made a tearful plea on live television. Her mother begged, "Please, if anyone has seen our daughter, come forward." Her father, normally a calm man, could barely speak. His eyes were red, his hands trembling. Police began interviewing everyone connected to Emily, her friends, her classmates, her co-workers. They searched parks, trails, and nearby lakes. K-9 units sniffed the area, following a trail that ended abruptly near a wooded path by the bookstore. The town held its breath. Parents grew more protective, warning children not to walk alone. Friends lit candles in front of the bookstore, hoping Emily would come back. But deep down, everyone feared the same dark thought. Something terrible had happened. 30 5:46 a.m. Gloria, you say I can't live without them. But think back. Once you said that about someone else. Once you said that about a place, a habit, a season of your life. And yet, you survived. You breathed. You kept walking. The truth is, you've outlived countless endings. Each time you thought the world had collapsed. Each time you sat in the silence and swore you'd never recover. But here you are, still standing, stronger than before. So why force it? Why bleed just to hold on to what already slipped away? Letting go isn't weakness. It's proof that you trust life enough to release your grip. Ask yourself, is clinging keeping you alive or slowly killing you? Don't force answers when the silence is speaking louder. Don't force people to stay when their footsteps are already fading. Don't force happiness in places where your soul feels empty. You think holding on shows love. But sometimes, the most powerful love is stepping back, giving life permission to move as it must. There's a quiet dignity in not chasing what runs, in not begging for what chooses to leave. It hurts, yes. It stings like salt on an open wound. But dignity leaves no scars. Forcing does. The question burns. If you stop forcing, will life fall apart or finally fall into place? Picture this. You're gripping broken glass. The tighter you squeeze, the deeper it cuts. You cry from the pain, yet you won't let go. Why? Because you tell yourself, if I release it, I'll have nothing. But the moment you open your hand, yes, blood flows. Yes, it hurts. But then, slowly, healing begins. And soon, your hand is free to hold something new. Life works the same way. Don't force broken things to stay whole. Don't trap yourself in what's already ended. Pain will pass. Freedom will remain. But here's the haunting question. What if the thing you need to release is not an object, not a dream, but a person you thought was your forever? 5509, 3:35 p.m. Gloria. Detectives worked around the clock to piece together what happened that October night. The first step was checking the security cameras around the bookstore. Unfortunately, the small shop had no cameras outside, but a gas station down the street did. When officers reviewed the blurry footage, they saw Emily's car parked where it had been found. A few minutes later, a shadowy figure appeared walking near her car. The person wore a hooded sweatshirt, their face hidden from the camera. Moments later, the figure vanished into the wooded path nearby. Detectives believed Emily might have been followed after leaving work. They returned to the wooded path and searched carefully. There, under fallen leaves, they discovered a broken bracelet. Emily's mother later confirmed it was hers. She wore it almost every day. The clue shook the family. If the bracelet had been ripped off, it suggested Emily was taken by force. The police now knew they were dealing with more than a missing person. This was a possible abduction. And the town of Redwood Shores realized that the peace they had always trusted might never return. With Emily still missing, police turned their focus to possible suspects. They started with people close to her. Friends told detectives about Emily's ex-boyfriend, Jason Miller, a 21-year-old who attended the same college. Their relationship had ended months earlier, and some said it didn't end well. One classmate remembered Jason arguing with Emily near the campus library a week before she disappeared. He seemed angry, accusing her of ignoring him. Detectives quickly brought Jason in for questioning. He appeared nervous but claimed he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. He said he was home the night she went missing, playing video games. His roommate confirmed this story, but detectives weren't fully convinced. At the same time, police also looked into a middle-aged man named Carl Benson. He was a frequent customer at the bookstore and often tried to chat with Emily. Co-workers recall. As the days passed, the Redwood Shores police called in help from the county sheriff's office and the FBI. Flyers with Emily's photo were handed out in grocery stores, gas stations, and schools. Her face was suddenly everywhere, on TV, on missing posters, even on billboards along the highway. Volunteers from the community joined the search. Neighbors, college students, and even strangers combed through fields and back roads, hoping to find something the police missed. Helicopters hovered overhead, scanning the forest with thermal cameras. Despite all these efforts, Emily remained missing. Each day without answers only deepened the fear in town. Parents locked their doors earlier at night, and college students avoided walking alone. The Carters joined every search, Susan clutching Emily's photo, while Robert carried a flashlight, his face pale and tired. "We won't stop until she's home," he told reporters. Still, behind closed doors, both parents felt the crushing weight of time slipping away. The silence of the forest seemed to hold secrets no one could unlock, and Redwood Shores realized this was no longer just a missing person case. It was a mystery pulling everyone into its dark grip. Detectives continued to focus on Jason Miller, Emily's ex-boyfriend. While his roommate swore Jason was home the night Emily disappeared, small details didn't add up. Phone records showed Jason had turned his phone off for 3 hours that evening. When detectives asked why, he claimed his battery died. Emily's friends also shared troubling stories. One recalled that Jason had driven past Emily's dorm multiple times after their breakup. Another said he saw Jason waiting outside her class, trying to talk to her even after she made it clear the relationship was over. When police confronted Jason with these stories, His frustration grew. "I loved Emily," he said, "but I would never hurt her." His voice cracked as he spoke, but detectives couldn't ignore the warning signs of jealousy and obsession. The community, too, began whispering about Jason. At candlelight vigils, some pointed fingers, while others defended him as a heartbroken young man unfairly blamed. The truth remained hidden, and Jason was caught in the middle of it, either as an innocent ex-boyfriend under suspicion or as the very person who knew what happened to Emily. 1 week after Emily disappeared, a jogger made a chilling discovery on a quiet trail just outside Redwood Shores. While running, he noticed something unusual beneath a bush, a cell phone with a cracked screen. He picked it up and saw the background photo, Emily smiling with her dog. The jogger immediately called police, who rushed to the scene. The phone was carefully bagged as evidence. Detectives confirmed it was Emily's. When the phone was examined, a series of unanswered calls from her mother appeared on the screen. The last outgoing call Emily made was at 9:42 p.m. on the night she disappeared, just minutes after she left work. But the call was never completed. Stranger still, fingerprints on the phone included Emily's, and another unknown print that didn't match her or her family. This discovery changed everything. Someone else had handled Emily's phone after she vanished. The police now had physical evidence linking a mystery person to the case. For the Carters, it was both hope and horror. Hope that clues were finally appearing, but horror that their daughter had likely fallen into someone else's hands. And Redwood Shores held its breath once again. The discovery of Emily's phone sent shockwaves through Redwood Shores. Neighbors gathered on porches, whispering about the case late into the night. Parents hugged their children tighter, warning them not to go anywhere alone. The once peaceful town now carried a shadow of fear. Local news ran daily updates, showing Emily's smiling photo beside flashing headlines, "Where is Emily Carter?" Churches held prayer services, and students organized vigils on campus. People who had never met Emily cried as if she were family, but with the growing fear came anger. Some residents criticized the police for not solving the case quickly. Others demanded more answers about Jason Miller, the ex-boyfriend many still suspected. At town hall meetings, voices rose in frustration, asking why Emily was still missing when clues were being found. Through it all, Emily's parents remained at the center of the storm. Susan often broke down on camera, clutching Emily's picture while Robert stood beside her, silent but visibly broken. The community was united in grief, but divided in suspicion. Everyone wanted justice, yet no one knew who to trust. And the question grew louder every day. Who took Emily Carter? While police continued questioning Jason, new information came from Emily's co-workers at the bookstore. They mentioned a middle-aged man, Carl Benson, who often lingered near closing time. Emily had once told a friend she felt uneasy around him. Detectives dug into Carl's background. He was a 45-year-old handyman who lived alone on the edge of town. He had no wife or children, and some neighbors described him as strange but quiet. Police visited Carl's small house. He answered the door nervously, his hands shaking. He said he knew Emily only as the nice girl at the bookstore and denied ever bothering her. Still, detectives noticed scratches on his arm. Carl claimed they came from working in his yard. Inside his home, officers spotted stacks of old newspapers and a messy living room. But nothing directly linked him to Emily. Without solid evidence, they couldn't arrest him. But the suspicion remained. Some in town whispered that Carl had been obsessed with Emily. Others thought he was just a lonely man caught in a nightmare of suspicion. Still, detectives added Carl Benson to their suspect list. And Emily's case grew darker with every passing day. The biggest lead remained the fingerprints on Emily's phone. Detectives rushed to compare them with prints from Jason Miller and Carl Benson. Jason's prints did not match. When Carl's prints were tested, the results were also negative. This only deepened the mystery. If neither Jason nor Carl touched Emily's phone, then who did? Investigators sent the unknown print to CODIS, the national DNA database, hoping for a match. But in 2005, technology was still limited, and results often took weeks or even months. For now, the case hit another frustrating wall. Emily's parents sat through endless meetings with detectives, listening to updates that always ended with the same words, "We're still waiting. Each time, their hope grew thinner. Meanwhile, the community's patience wore down. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some believed Jason was guilty but clever enough to hide it. Others swore Carl was the one, pointing to his odd behavior. But with no DNA match and no arrest, the case slipped into dangerous territory, the risk of going cold. And as the nights grew longer, Redwood Shores wondered if Emily Carter would ever be found. 2 weeks after Emily disappeared, the town held a candlelight vigil at the local park. Hundreds of people gathered, each holding a small candle that flickered in the cool evening breeze. Posters of Emily's smiling face lined the stage, along with flowers and handwritten notes. Emily's best friend Hannah stood before the crowd, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Emily is kind, gentle, and full of dreams. She doesn't deserve this. Please, if anyone knows anything, come forward." Tears rolled down her cheeks as the crowd murmured in agreement. Then Susan Carter took the microphone. Holding back sobs, she begged, "Please bring my daughter home. We can't live like this." Her words broke the silence, and people cried openly, some hugging strangers. The vigil was broadcast on local TV. Viewers across California saw the heartbreak of a small town desperately searching for answers. But behind the candles and prayers was a haunting truth. There were still no new leads. Emily was gone, and no one knew where. The vigil gave the community hope for one night, but the darkness of uncertainty returned as soon as the candles burned out. As days turned into weeks, suspicion on Jason Miller grew heavier. Students whispered behind his back on campus. Strangers stared at him in grocery stores. Even though police had not charged him, many in Redwood Shores had already made up their minds. Jason stopped going to class. His professors noticed his once clean appearance was gone. He looked tired, unshaven, and hollow-eyed. His roommate said Jason barely ate and spent hours pacing the apartment. Detectives brought him in for another round of questioning. "Tell us again where you were that night," one officer demanded. Jason repeated the same story. Home, video games, nothing more. But his words sounded weaker each time, weighed down by pressure. When asked about the argument near the library, Jason admitted he was upset about the breakup. "I wanted her back," he whispered, "but I didn't hurt her." Even as he said it, detectives noticed his hands shaking. Was Jason truly innocent, or was guilt eating away at him? The town remained divided. Some believed his pain proved innocence, while others swore it was the face of a liar. And the truth about Emily still hid in the shadows. By November 2005, nearly a month after Emily vanished, the case seemed to stall. The search parties stopped. The helicopters no longer hovered. Reporters moved on to other stories. For the Carter family, the silence was unbearable. Susan spent her days sitting in Emily's bedroom, holding her daughter's green sweater, still carrying her scent. Robert buried himself in work, trying to stay strong, but at night he broke down in tears where no one could see. Detectives admitted they had no new leads. The unknown fingerprint was still unmatched in the database. Without fresh evidence, the investigation slowed to a crawl. Neighbors who once brought meals and comfort began drifting back into their routines. Posters of Emily faded in the rain. Some peeled off walls, leaving only faint outlines where her face once smiled. The case that had once consumed Redwood Shores now hung over it like a quiet ghost. People no longer spoke Emily's name as often, but the fear remained. And for the Carter family, every sunrise was another reminder that their daughter was still missing. Emily's story was on the edge of being forgotten. As winter crept into Redwood Shores, the air carried a different chill, one not just from the cold, but from the unshakable weight of Emily's absence. Streets that once bustled with life after dark now grew quiet by sunset. Parents warned their children to come home early, and students avoided walking alone. Emily's case had become a ghost that hovered over the town. At the bookstore where she worked, her old co-workers placed a framed photo near the register. Customers paused when they saw it, some whispering a prayer, others looking away quickly. For the Carter family, the holiday season was unbearable. The idea of Thanksgiving without Emily left Susan in tears at the dinner table. Robert tried to stay strong, but his silence only deepened the pain. Hannah, Emily's best friend, admitted she no longer felt safe walking on campus. her laughter gone, replaced by a constant glance over her shoulder. The case wasn't just unsolved, it was unfinished business that gnawed at everyone. And yet, the police files grew dusty, the calls from reporters fewer. Redwood Shores was haunted by a mystery that refused to fade. Just as hope seemed lost, a small breakthrough surfaced. A woman called the police tip line, saying she saw a dark pickup truck near the bookstore parking lot the night Emily vanished. She didn't report it earlier, fearing it was nothing. But something about the truck's slow circling bothered her enough to finally speak. Detectives traced her description to a black Ford F-150, registered to a man named Paul Rivera, a contractor who lived 2 towns over. He had no obvious connection to Emily, but his truck was often seen in Redwood Shores for work. When questioned, Rivera admitted being in town that night, but claimed he was just passing through. Detectives noted his calm demeanor, almost too calm. They inspected his truck but found nothing suspicious. No blood, no fibers, no sign of Emily. Still, the tip reignited the case. The Carters, desperate for answers, clung to the possibility that Rivera could be the missing link. Yet, without evidence, police couldn't move forward. The name went into the files, joining Jason and Carl as another shadowy figure in the story, and Redwood Shores braced itself for more uncertainty. Months slipped by, and Emily's case entered 2006 with no resolution. The missing posters grew worn and weather-stained, some ripped down entirely. New students arrived on campus, unaware of the girl who once walked those same hallways. The Carter family lived in a limbo few could imagine. Susan stopped working, dedicating her days to writing letters to police, senators, even television shows, pleading for Emily's story to stay alive. Robert, quieter but equally shattered, found himself driving to old search sites late at night, staring into the woods as if answers might finally appear. Detectives admitted the case was going cold. Without new evidence, all they had were theories. Jason's jealousy, Carl's strange behavior, Rivera's truck. But nothing tied any of them directly to Emily. For Redwood Shores, Emily became a painful memory, a reminder of how quickly life could shatter. And yet, beneath the silence, something remained. An unease that the story wasn't over. The case had not been solved. It had only been paused, waiting for the moment when the truth would finally break free. By spring 2006, the town of Redwood Shores was ready to move on, even if the Carter family wasn't. The posters were gone, the vigils stopped, and Emily's name rarely appeared in the news anymore. For many, she was becoming a sad memory instead of a living mystery. But for Susan Carter, forgetting was impossible. She kept Emily's room exactly as it had been, bed neatly made, textbooks stacked on the desk, a sweater draped across the chair. Each morning, she opened the blinds, whispering, "Good morning, sweetheart." Each night, she closed them again, whispering, "Good night." Robert coped differently. He avoided the bedroom, burying himself in work and rarely speaking. Neighbors noticed the once warm, outgoing family had grown quiet, hollow. The Carters were living, but only in pieces. Detectives still received occasional tips, but most led nowhere. With no arrests, no body, and no closure, Emily's case slid further into the background. For Redwood Shores, life returned to normal. For the Carters, it never would. Emily's absence was a wound that time refused to heal. In the police station, Emily's case file sat stacked among dozens of others in the cold case cabinet. Thick with notes, photos, and interviews, it told a story that still had no ending. Detectives hated admitting it, but the trail was frozen. One officer, Detective Morales, often found himself pulling the file late at night. He read Emily's timeline again and again, searching for the piece he might have missed. The phone, the fingerprint, the suspects, Jason, Carl, Rivera, all of it felt like puzzle pieces from different boxes. But the department's resources were stretched thin. New crimes demanded attention. New cases filled the desks. Emily's file was slowly buried under fresh paperwork. For the Carter family, this was unbearable. Each time they called the station, they heard the same tired line, "We're still working on it." But the truth was simple. Without new evidence, the case had gone cold. The weight of that reality crushed everyone who still remembered her smile, and Emily's story seemed destined to fade into silence. Emily's best friend Hannah refused to let her memory die. While others drifted on with their lives, Hannah carried the loss like a shadow. She avoided parties, stopped dating, and spent most evenings writing in a journal about Emily. One entry read, "The world may forget you, but I won't. I'll keep telling your story until someone listens." Hannah joined missing persons advocacy groups online, learning about other families in similar pain. She even started handing out flyers at nearby towns, hoping someone had seen something that police missed. Friends worried about her, saying she was trapped in the past. But Hannah didn't care. She felt a responsibility to keep Emily's case alive. Every year on Emily's birthday, Hannah placed flowers at the bookstore where they once worked together. Sometimes she stood there alone, sometimes with a few friends, but always with the same hope, that one day Emily would be found. Her determination became a quiet spark, a reminder that Emily's story wasn't finished. Even if the world moved on, Hannah wouldn't, and her promise ensured that the search for truth never completely died. By 2007, nearly 2 years after Emily vanished, Redwood Shores had changed. New businesses opened, new students arrived at the university, and life slowly carried on. But for the Carters, time stood still. Susan still left the porch light on every night, convinced Emily might somehow find her way home. Robert grew quieter with each passing month, speaking less about hope and more about acceptance. The couple rarely smiled, their lives now defined by what was missing. Detectives moved on to other cases, though a few officers admitted Emily's file haunted them. "She deserved answers," one said quietly. But without new leads, their hands were tied. The case that once consumed headlines now lived only in the memories of those closest to her. Most people in town no longer spoke her name, but the silence itself was telling. Emily Carter wasn't forgotten. She was simply locked away in the unsolved shadows of time. Even as years passed, whispers about Emily's disappearance continued. Some swore Jason Miller had something to do with it, pointing to his sudden decision to leave town in 2008. Others insisted Carl Benson, the quiet handyman, knew more than he admitted. A few still remembered the black pickup truck and wondered if Paul Rivera had been overlooked. The rumors kept Emily's case alive, but they also created division. Each suspect had defenders and accusers. At local diners, arguments would flare. It had to be Jason versus no, it was that strange man, Carl. Detectives warned against gossip, but with no answers, the community clung to theories. Each version of the story painted a different villain, a different fate for Emily. The truth remained hidden, buried beneath speculation, but the rumors carried weight, shaping the way people remembered Emily, not just as the smiling young woman who loved books, but as the center of a mystery no one could solve. And that mystery still lingered like a shadow over Redwood Shores. The years of waiting began to wear on the Carter family. Grief had bound them together at first, but time pulled them apart. Susan still pushed for answers, attending every town meeting, writing letters, begging the police not to give up. Robert, exhausted by the endless pain, withdrew. He believed their daughter was gone and that no amount of searching would change that. Their marriage grew strained. Conversations turned into arguments, Susan accusing Robert of giving up, Robert accusing Susan of torturing herself. Even in the same house, they felt worlds apart. Holidays became unbearable. Birthdays were left uncelebrated. The laughter that once filled their home was gone. Yet through all the heartbreak, one truth remained. Neither parent could escape Emily's absence. Whether holding on or letting go, both were prisoners of the same unanswered question. What happened to their daughter? The family that once stood strong together was slowly unraveling. And Emily's disappearance wasn't just a tragedy for one young woman. It was a wound tearing apart everyone who loved her. By 2010, Emily Carter's file was officially labeled a cold case. It was placed inside a cabinet with dozens of others, each folder carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Detectives moved on, chasing new crimes that demanded their attention. For Susan Carter, this was a crushing blow. She pleaded with the department not to give up, but she was told the same thing each time. If new evidence comes in, we'll reopen it. The words felt hollow, a polite way of saying her daughter's case was no longer a priority. Robert grew bitter. He stopped joining Susan at community meetings and no longer spoke about Emily with friends. Some nights, he sat alone in the dark, staring at family photos, his silence heavier than words. The town of Redwood Shores had largely moved on. New students on campus didn't know Emily's name. The bookstore where she once worked hired new staff, her framed photo quietly taken down. But for the Carters, and for Hannah, her absence was still raw. Emily's story was not closed. It was only buried under time. Hannah, now older, refused to let Emily's case fade into silence. While many of their peers graduated, married, and moved away, Hannah dedicated herself to advocacy. She volunteered for missing persons groups, attending rallies and seminars about unsolved cases. She carried Emily's photo in her wallet, showing it to anyone who would listen. "This is my best friend," she would say. "She's still missing, please don't forget her." Her persistence sometimes drew eye rolls. People told her to move on, that dwelling on Emily's disappearance was only hurting her. But Hannah refused. "If this happened to you," she'd respond, "wouldn't you want someone to keep fighting?" Hannah also pushed investigators, sending them articles about new forensic technologies, asking if Emily's evidence could be tested again. She refused to believe the case was hopeless. Her voice became one of the few keeping Emily's name alive. And though she felt alone at times, Hannah believed one thing deeply. Someday, the truth would surface. By 2015, technology in forensic science had advanced. Databases were larger, testing more precise, and new methods allowed old evidence to be re-examined. Detective Morales, the one officer who never fully let go of Emily's case, quietly revisited her file. The cracked phone, the unknown fingerprint, the unsolved trail, it all haunted him. He submitted the fingerprint for new analysis, hoping the expanded database might finally catch something. Weeks passed with no response. Still, Morales held on to a quiet sense of hope. Meanwhile, Hannah caught wind of his renewed efforts. She reached out to Susan, who burst into tears upon hearing that someone, anyone, still cared enough to look again. For the first time in years, a spark of possibility flickered. Maybe the silence wasn't permanent. Maybe the story wasn't finished. Emily's case had slept in the cold for a decade, but now, whispers of progress hinted that the truth might finally be within reach. In March 2016, Detective Morales received a call that made his heart race. The fingerprint he had resubmitted months earlier finally came back with a hit. The database matched it to a man named Victor Hayes. He was in his early 40s with a long criminal history, burglary, assault, and several arrests tied to drugs. At the time of Emily's disappearance, Victor had been living only a few miles from Redwood Shores. The discovery sent a chill through Morales. This wasn't just a stranger passing through. This man had been right there, part of the same community. Within hours, Morales pulled Victor's old records. His mugshots showed a cold stare, the kind that unsettled even seasoned detectives. It wasn't enough for an arrest, but it was enough to reopen Emily Carter's case after more than 10 years of silence. The Carters were notified. Susan dropped the phone when she heard the name. Robert sat down heavily, his hands shaking. For them, it was the first real lead in over a decade. Hope, fragile but fierce, returned to their lives. Detectives began piecing together Victor Hayes' life in 2005. Back then, he was in his late 20s, drifting between jobs and known for sudden bursts of violence. He lived with a girlfriend not far from the university, but neighbors remembered frequent shouting matches. Police records showed that he had once been questioned in connection with a burglary near the campus bookstore, the same place Emily worked. Nothing stuck at the time, but now the dots seemed to connect. Detective Morales also learned that Victor had suddenly left Redwood Shores just weeks after Emily vanished, relocating to Nevada. The timing was too sharp to ignore. Investigators tracked down his ex-girlfriend. Nervous and hesitant, she admitted that Victor would disappear for hours at night back in 2005. When Emily's disappearance came up in the news, she recalled Victor growing defensive and saying, "People disappear all the time. It's not our problem." The statement, though not proof, painted a darker picture of him. It was becoming clear. Victor Hayes was more than a name in a file. he was a man whose shadow had touched Emily's life. With Victor Hayes identified, the Redwood Shores police reopened Emily's file in full. Detectives pored over every detail: her cracked phone, the blood trace on her sweater, the chaotic footprints near the bookstore. They sent the blood sample to be tested again with improved technology. The lab confirmed what hadn't been possible in 2005. The blood was a partial match to Victor Hayes. It wasn't enough alone to convict him, but it tied him to the scene in a way that couldn't be ignored. Detective Morales felt the weight of both excitement and caution. After so many years, the last thing he wanted was a mistake. He began building the case slowly, gathering witness statements, cross-checking Victor's old addresses, and contacting Nevada police to keep tabs on his current activities. For Susan and Robert, hearing that Victor's DNA was linked to Emily's sweater was like reopening an old wound and finally seeing light through it. Their daughter's story was no longer forgotten. The investigation was alive again. Detectives in Nevada began quietly watching Victor Hayes. By 2017, he lived in a rundown apartment outside Reno, working odd jobs and spending most of his nights at bars. They didn't approach him right away. Instead, they studied his routine: when he left home, who he met, what he said. Hidden cameras caught him pacing nervously, sometimes muttering to himself. Morales wanted patience. "We can't rush this," he told the team. "We need him cornered by evidence, not guesses." Meanwhile, investigators reviewed old reports again. They discovered Victor had once worked briefly at a landscaping company that serviced the Redwood Shores campus. That meant he had easy access to the bookstore area, the very place Emily disappeared. The more they dug, the more his name fit into the puzzle. For Susan, hearing that Victor was alive and walking free was unbearable. "He's out there, drinking in bars, while Emily's been gone all these years," she whispered. Justice felt close, but still just out of reach. In early 2018, the biggest breakthrough arrived. Forensic experts used a new technology called familial DNA matching. It allowed investigators to link crime scene samples, not only to individuals, but also to relatives in public databases. When Emily's case evidence was tested again, the system flagged Victor Hayes' younger brother. That led investigators straight back to Victor with even stronger certainty. This time there was no doubt. The blood on Emily's sweater belonged to him. Detective Morales nearly dropped the report when he read the results. After 13 years, they finally had proof strong enough to move forward. Susan cried when she heard the news. Robert closed his eyes and whispered, "Finally." Hannah, Emily's best friend, sat in silence before saying, "I knew this day would come." The cold case that haunted Redwood Shores was heating up again, and the suspect who once slipped through cracks now stood in the direct line of justice. With DNA evidence tying Victor to Emily, detectives built the case carefully. They tracked down old witnesses, including college students who remembered Victor loitering near campus in 2005. Some even recalled a man matching his description, hanging outside the bookstore late at night. Detectives also pulled his old phone records, showing he had been near Redwood Shores the very night Emily vanished. Piece by piece, the puzzle was becoming clear. In July 2018, Morales and a Nevada task force prepared to arrest Victor. They waited until he left his apartment one evening, casually walking toward a corner store. Unmarked vehicles surrounded him. Officers stepped out with badges and handcuffs. Victor froze, his face pale. "What's this about?" he barked. Morales stared at him and said, "Emily Carter, you remember her?" Victor's eyes darted nervously. He tried to speak, but no words came. After 13 long years, the man believed to be behind Emily's disappearance was finally in custody. When news broke that Victor Hayes had been arrested for Emily Carter's disappearance, Redwood Shores erupted in shock. For years, the case had felt like a ghost story, spoken of in whispers, remembered with sadness, but with no answers. Suddenly, the name of the suspect was on every screen, every headline. Cold case break. Arrest made in 2005. Disappearance of Emily Carter. Neighbors who once lived near Victor couldn't believe it. "He was quiet, kept to himself," one said. "I never thought he could do something like this." Others weren't surprised. They remembered his anger, his shouting, his temper. For Susan and Robert, the arrest was bittersweet. Their daughter was still gone, but now the man who had stolen her life would finally face consequences. Hannah stood outside the courthouse the day Victor arrived in shackles. Tears ran down her face as she whispered, "You thought you got away, but Emily's voice is louder than silence." After 13 years, the town's oldest wound was reopening, but this time to heal. Victor Hayes was charged with murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The courtroom filled with reporters, students, and townspeople who had carried Emily's memory for years. Prosecutors presented the evidence piece by piece: the DNA on her sweater, the fingerprint, the phone records, and witnesses recalling Victor lurking near the bookstore. Victor's lawyer argued there was no body, no direct proof of how Emily died, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every thread pointed back to him. Susan and Robert sat in the front row each day, holding hands. Sometimes Susan wept quietly. Robert kept his eyes fixed on Victor, his jaw clenched tight. Hannah testified too. Her voice shook as she told the court about Emily's kindness, her dreams, and the night she vanished. "She was more than a case file," Hannah said. "She was my best friend." The trial stretched on for weeks, but in the end, the truth stood taller than Victor's denials. In 2019, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on all counts. Victor Hayes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom fell silent for a moment. Then Susan let out a sob of relief. Robert wrapped his arm around her, whispering, "It's over. She finally has justice." Outside, cameras flashed as Hannah spoke on behalf of the family. "Emily's light never went out. Today, we proved that time cannot bury the truth." Redwood Shores, once haunted by Emily's disappearance, felt a shift. Parents who had warned their children for years finally told them the story had an ending. The bookstore where Emily once worked placed her photo back on the wall, this time with the words, "In loving memory, justice served." Though Emily would never return, her legacy lived on in the hearts of those who fought for her. And for the Carters, while grief would always remain, there was finally peace in knowing that the man who took their daughter's life would never hurt anyone again. The cold case was no longer cold. Justice had arrived.